All right, let's begin. We'll pray first. Father, thank you for gathering us together this morning safely. Thank you that the weather wasn't as bad as some thought it might be. Thank you for the safe travels for Xi'an. We ask that you be with Karen today and anybody else that's not with us. And we ask that you guide our study today. Have us learn what you've put here for a reason. We ask that in your name. Amen. All right, so last week we looked at Judges chapter 10. We spent a lot of time talking about Tola and the Tola worm and how that compared to Christ. And then this week we're going to look at Judges chapters 11 and 12. We're going to meet one of the more famous judges. His name's Jephthah. But to pick up where that story kind of drops us into, we will recap kind of where we left off with in chapter 10. So chapter 10, verses 17 and 18 said, "Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, 'Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead.'" Right. So we see that the people knew that they needed somebody to lead them in battle against the Ammonites. We also notice that when the Ammonites gathered up, this is how battles would take place, even all the way up to pretty recent history, the past couple hundred years. People would kind of gather their army all together in one place. The opposing army would all gather in one place, and they would just go to war, and whoever survived, that would be the winners. So we see the Ammonite army is gathering in Gilead, and the people of Gilead are gathering at Mizpah. The Israelites are gathering at Mizpah. So these two armies are gathering, and that's where Judges chapter 11 picks up. So verses 1 to 3. "Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons." So we understand that Gilead was married, and him and his wife had sons, but he also had a relationship with this prostitute, and that's where Jephthah came from. It goes on, "And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, 'You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman.' Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. And worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him." Now, we've seen worthless fellows before. It's been brought up a few different times, and it's going to continue to be brought up in Scripture. Worthless fellows is really just the kind of the lower class of society. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people. They could be not. It just means that they're kind of they're looked down on by the rest of society. So those people gather around Jephthah because it starts off in verse 1. It tells us that he's a mighty warrior. So people like that attract other people like that, right? So we don't know. It says Gilead was his father. We don't know if it's the same Gilead that was the grandson of Manasseh. If you remember, Joseph had Ephraim and Manasseh, which are two of the tribal clans that we have. Remember the double portion that went to Joseph when they were handing out the tribal allotments. Joseph didn't get one at all, but his two sons each got one, Ephraim and Manasseh. So Manasseh, one of Joseph's sons, had a grandson named Gilead, and that's where this region is named after. We don't know if that same Gilead is Jephthah's father or if Jephthah's father was named after him. That we don't know. Regardless, he had a child with a prostitute, and that's Jephthah. So Gilead also had other sons, but because Jephthah's mom was a prostitute, the other sons wouldn't let him stay there and live with the family and share the inheritance. That was pretty normal for their culture. So we know Jephthah, because his mom was a prostitute, for that reason alone, he was regarded poorly. He was also a worthless man, just because of that, especially regarded that way by his brothers. It seemed the other soldiers didn't seem to have a problem because, again, he was a mighty warrior, and they don't care about things like who your mom is. But anyways, being an illegitimate son, which is what that would be, since he was born outside of the marriage, that would deny him any inheritance, any family rights, anything like that. So his brothers make him leave out of their town, right? They force him out. They show him the door. You got to go. But since he was a mighty warrior, we see even in his new town, when he went to Tob, people still banded around him, even if they're considered worthless fellows. So back to Judges, chapter 11, verses 4 to 11 reads, "After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob." Remember, his brothers, also Gileadites, the other people that were in the region of Gilead, are the ones that drove him out. Okay. And now the elders of that same place are trying to get him to come back because they're at war. And we have a mighty warrior, but we already kicked him out of town. Verse 6, "And they said to Jephthah, 'Come and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites.' But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, 'Do you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?' And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, 'That is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead.'" So they're not even sugarcoating it. They admit that they did drive him out, and the only reason they want him back is because they're in this war now. So he says, "You only want me back because you're in a war." And they say, "Yeah. So will you come do that? And if you do, then you'll be our leader." So he has a decision to make there. Verse 9, "Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, 'If you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gives them over to me, I will be your head.'" So he agrees. He'll come back, even though they understand that they drove him out and they didn't like him. But if he saves them or delivers them, then he can be their leader. But Jephthah right away says, "If you bring me home." We see that's what he's interested in. Jephthah just wants to go home. And he also says, "If you bring me home and the Lord delivers or gives them over to me." So Jephthah has his mind in the right place already. He's not saying, "If you bring me home, I'll be able to take this victory." He says, "If you bring me home and the Lord gives us this victory, I'll be your head." So Jephthah's off to a really good start here. Verse 10, "And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, 'Yahweh will be witness between us if we do not do as you say.' So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah." So we see that he after they left this place, because they're having this conversation in Tob, because that's where Jephthah is, and they're trying to get him to come back. So after they come to this agreement, the end of verse 11 there, Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. That means after they came to this agreement, Jephthah then went to Mizpah and made a covenant with God, reciting these same things, this agreement that they had made between the elders and him. So they're desperate for a military leader. Jephthah already has that reputation, so they know where to find him. They kicked him out. He went to this other place, so they just, he's easy to find. They just go up there, and the hard part is talking him into coming back. But after he makes that deal with them, they're happy to bring him back in. He's already given credit to God for a victory that hasn't started yet. So everything's starting off very good, but we know what book we're in, so we'll see how it goes. So verse 12, "Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, 'What do you have against me that you have come to me to fight against my land?'" Right? Because the Ammonites, remember, they're gathering at Gilead, and the Israelites are gathering at Mizpah. Right? So Jephthah is sending a messenger from the Israelite camp to the Ammonite camp before this war gets started and says, "Hey, why are you doing this? What do you have against me that you've come to fight against me in my own land?" Right? Verse 13, "The king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, 'Because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land. from the Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan. Now, therefore, restore it peaceably. So if we remember, the Israelites didn't take any land from the Ammonites. They did from just about every other ite out there, but the Ammonites weren't on that list. So why is this guy getting mad saying that the Israelites took their land? We'll cover that. Verse 14, Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him, "Thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. But when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, 'Please let us pass through your land.' But the king of Edom wouldn't listen. And they sent also to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh." Do you guys remember that? They had a nice straight shot into the promised land. All they had to do was go through Edom, but Edom wouldn't let them. And then they asked the Moab, and Moab wouldn't let them, right? So they had to go all the way around the outside. Do you guys remember that? They take this path, this red line. They come all the way out. So Egypt on this map it's actually behind the key, the Great Out area. So they come down on that east side and go south to the edge of the peninsula there, and then they're taking that red line to go back up to the promised land, right? This is their journey through the wilderness. And then when they get to the top there, that's when they send out the spies, and they have to do another lap. But there's the path that they ended up taking. They ended up going straight east, that red line from Kadesh, straight east. And since Edom wouldn't let them go through there, they had to go all the way back south and go all the way around to Edom, come back up on the eastern edge of Edom and Moab just to get around to where they could get up there to come into the promised land from the east. So they were very careful not to attack anybody they weren't told to. Verse 18, "Then they journeyed through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and arrived on the east side of the land of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab." So keep in mind, this is Jephthah sending the message to the king that is about to invade him. He's saying, "Look, we didn't take this from you guys. Here's the story," because we can tell that the Ammonite king knows some of Israelite history, because he's saying stuff that happened hundreds of years ago. You guys did this and this and this. The problem is he has it a little bit wrong. He has it some right and some wrong. And Jephthah's correcting him. No, we came this way and went that way, right? Verse 19 should clear it up. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon. You guys remember Sihon? Sihon and Og? Yep. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites. Notice how Amorite and Ammonite are not the same thing. So he sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, "Please let us pass through your land to our country." But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. So remember, when they tried to pass through Edom said, "No, you can't come through here. And if you do, we will attack you." And then they sent the message to try to pass through Sihon. And he said, he didn't say no. He just didn't trust him. So he just attacked them. So this was we don't trust you even asking. So Sihon actually attacked Israel. Israel didn't attack him, but that was their mistake. Verse 21, "And the Lord Yahweh, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country." Right? So Israel wasn't even part of the conquest. They only gained that land because they were attacked by those people. So after they defeated them, that was their land now. Verse 22, "And they took possession of all the territory of the Amorites, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. So then Yahweh, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people. And are you to take possession of them?" Right? So Jephthah is saying, he gives this long explanation of how the Israelites came into being that land, how they didn't attempt to conquer any of that land. The people that lived there attacked them, which was how they conquered that land. And the Israelites didn't take it from the Ammonites. Sihon and Og took it from the Ammonites, then much later, the Israelites defeated them and took it from them. So we do see that at some point in time, this was Ammonite territory, but they lost it to Sihon and Og, the Amorites. So when Israel defeated them, they got the territory. But there was never a battle between the Israelites and the Ammonites. So this other king, Jephthah, is saying, you're out of pocket by attacking me. You don't have any grounds for it. We took this from the people that already defeated you. So we kind of see both sides of it. And that last part of that last verse, I enjoy that, right? So it says, then the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people, Israel. And are you to take possession of them? In other words, God kicked out the people that defeated you, right? The people that kicked you out, God kicked them out. And now you think that you are going to kick God out, right? That's what he's asking with that question. So he's trying to remind them of that. Israel is the people of the Almighty God. These aren't false God number one and false God number two and all that these people are used to. This is God Almighty, and he doesn't lose battles. And you're going to take it away from him is what he's saying. The next verse adds a little bit more of the humor. Verse 24. We see that Jephthah is kind of in this state of confusion. Like, do you really think you're the one to take this land back from Yahweh's people? And so verse 24, will you not possess what Shemosh, your God, gives you to possess? And all that the Lord our God has dispossessed before us, we will possess, right? So in other words, whatever land your God gave you, you should stay in that land, because our God gave us this land, and he's stronger than your God. So we're going to stay in the land that our God gave us, and whatever land your God, Shemosh, gave you, maybe you should possess that. Don't start nothing. Won't be nothing. Verse 25, now are you better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? You guys remember Balak? Right? Do you remember Balaam? The story of the donkey, Balaam's donkey? Balak is the king that hired Balaam to curse Israel. We remember that story. And what Jephthah's saying here, are you better than him? Balak was a king. He hired Balaam to curse Israel. But he said, did he ever contend against Israel? Did they go to war with Israel, even though he kept trying to curse them? Nope. Why didn't they go to war? Because every time he tried to curse them, God blessed them. And he said, okay, this is pointless, right? So if we remember, when Balaam tried to do his 3 oracles to pronounce curses against Israel, 3 different times he tried to curse Israel. And 3 different times it came out as a blessing for Israel and actually a curse against the people that were trying to curse Israel. All right. Every time he tried, it would bless Israel and curse Balak and his people. And he ends up even prophesying that Edom and Moab, the 2 territories the Israelites tried to go through, that both of them would be dispossessed. He prophesied that. And now we're fighting over that land. So there's really no, if the Ammonites had the scripture, they could have easily read that, I guess we'll just go back where we came from, which appears to be maybe southeast of this area. So verse 26, while Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years. Why did you not deliver them within that time? In other words, if you had a gripe over this land, why have you waited 300 years to bring it up? Because that's how long we've been here now, right? So why wait till now? Verse 27, I therefore have not sinned against you, but you do me wrong by making war on me. Yahweh, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. But the king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words of Jephthah that he sent to him. So the king didn't listen. That's a mistake. Verse 29, then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So sometimes we say things, right? Sometimes we say stupid things. Sometimes we make bad promises. So I say there's probably a lot of people that have made vows to God that they didn't keep. Probably more than a few of those vows were made while kneeling in front of a toilet. I'll never do this again or that again. And while people might have every intention of keeping those vows, it seems ones made in situations like that aren't taken real serious. It seems almost like a moment of weakness. Well, I just said that because whatever reason, I didn't feel good, or I was stressed out, or, and these things aren't taken seriously. So Jephthah made this vow, stupid vow. It's the type of vow that the Canaanites would make. And now they are living among and with the Canaanites at this point because they're not properly being separated. So it's normal that parts of the culture will leak in and leak out, which is probably why the Lord wanted them to be a separate people. So you wouldn't have parts of the culture leaking in. So common thing for a Canaanite to do would be offering sacrifices, even human sacrifices, just for the chance to obtain success, right? For the chance to win a battle, for the chance to be wealthy. Most of the time, it was babies that were offered on altars of false gods in exchange for the hopes of success. The sacrifice of a baby was the most common sacrifice for these Canaanite cultures. And sacrificing babies on the altar of success is something that still happens today. It's a different altar. It's a different God. It's a different style of sacrifice. But in principle, the same thing still happens now. Sacrifice a child to try to ensure a better, successful future for an adult. We'll come back to that. Back to Judges, verse 32. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand, and he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Meneth, 20 cities, as far as Abel Keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel, right? So he pushed them back 20 cities. So if we look here, he came from Tob, which is the furthest north on there, and he followed that little purple path down to Mizpah. And then we have the battles starting there. And then he's going to drive them down that where that green and yellow is. He's going to drive those guys all the way down south of where it says Ammon, down to where it says Rabbah and Abel Karim, all the way down to there. He's going to drive them down. And they're going to have to resort to going west down from the south over near the territory of Benjamin. But for right now, they are driven all the way down to Abel Keramim. 20 cities he pushed them back out of, 20 Israelite cities. So I would say that is a strong victory. It doesn't give us much details about these battles other than he struck them down with a mighty blow and pushed them back these 20 cities. Okay, so we know it was a dominant victory all the way out the southern border of the promised land. But now he has a vow to keep, a stupid vow. Verse 34. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. Now, it's very common in those times when the men would come back from these military victories that the women would go out in the streets and sing and dance and celebrate when they come home. It's very normal. So the first person that comes out of his house, the first anything that comes out of his house is his only child, his daughter. Verse 35, and as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. And she said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to Yahweh. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth. And now that Yahweh has avenged you on your enemies, the Ammonites." So she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone for 2 months, that I might go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, me and my companions." So Jephthah said, "Go." Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament. That means to cry for, or to remember somberly. To lament, a lament would be like if you went to somebody's tombstone, gravestone, a dear person's tombstone. You would go there to kind of bring up somber. It's lamenting, right? You're remembering it, and not necessarily remembering sadness, but you're bringing that person to mind, to think about them. It causes sorrow. It's lamenting. So every year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite, 4 days every year they go up and do that. So it does not say how Jephthah fulfills the vow. So there is a decent amount of debate over which way he did this. One thing is for sure, he did fulfill that vow. We're just not sure how. So sacrificing her, choice number one, sacrificing her as a burnt offering would be breaking the law, breaking the Mosaic law, the law of Moses, which these people were still under. So sacrificing her would break that law, which would then require Jephthah to be killed. So there's a downside there. There's a couple downsides there. That doesn't mean that since he was their leader, he may have still done it and they just let him off the hook because he was the leader and that was the vow he made. But we do learn in 1 Samuel chapter 14 that sometimes these vows can be allowed to be fulfilled by different ways, by different means. And what we learn from that story in 1 Samuel is that Saul also makes a very stupid vow. And that vow is going to cost his son Jonathan his life if they go through with it. So Saul gets all the way to the point where he's ready to behead his son Jonathan for breaking a vow that he didn't even know was made. But the people intervene on Jonathan's behalf, and they save him from that. So it could be that the same situation may have happened here, because we do see in verse 39 here that they go up and weep for her virginity. So it might indicate that rather than being a burnt sacrifice offered to the Lord, that instead it was her life that was offered to God, the same way that some of the prophets, Samson's life, even from birth, is offered to God. I believe Samuel is as well. Obviously, Jesus's was. So it seems like she may have just been celibate for the rest of her life as a offering to God. We don't know really which one it is. It could be either one. The main thing that we know is that we shouldn't be making these kind of dumb vows, right? If you think you're going to gain some sort of standing with God because you're making a vow, you think hard about that. He would prefer us not to. We will later learn when we get to Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, verses 4 and 5 says, when you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, right? Pay it right away. For he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. So we read that verse and we go, oh, well, Jephthah owes God a burnt sacrifice of his daughter then. But that next verse, is it better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay? Right? So what he's saying is, if you make a vow, basically it says, don't make one. It's better for you if you just don't. But if you do, you better pay it, right? If you do make a vow, which you shouldn't, you better hold up to it. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of tough to follow. It's not the only tough story in Judges. But the Bible's honest. It's not sugarcoating stuff for us to make us think that these people are better than they really were. The same for us. We have no reason to think that we're better than we really are. Moving on to chapter 12. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, right? So Jephthah just wins this battle. He gets home to celebrate. His celebration is his daughter comes out. So that's not a great celebration, right? Regardless of which way he fulfilled that vow, it definitely was a sad time for them. So they're just coming off of this huge victory, and then they have this very sad part of the story that happens. And then right after that, if we remember from when Gideon was out doing his thing, what happens after a good battle? Then the men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zephon and said to Jephthah, why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go to war with you? We will burn your house over you with fire. So these are the same people that got mad when Gideon didn't call them to help with the fights. But if we remember in Gideon's story, God picked the army. It was 32,000 guys, and then it was 10,000, and then it was 300. Right? So God slimmed that army down on purpose, for he would get glory from that battle, which is what Gideon told him. Didn't you guys get the better part anyways? We did the battle part. Well, God did the battle part. He just used us for it. And then you guys got the honor of capturing the kings. And that's how Gideon was able to be diplomatic and calm down the people from Ephraim during that time. We learned that Jephthah isn't a diplomat. He doesn't really use his words real good like Gideon did. So when these people, and they are a little more upfront too, because they're not just complaining that, hey, you didn't call me, man. The last part of that is, we're going to burn your house down on you with you in it. All right. So they're very upset and they want to kill him for it. Verse 2, and Jephthah said to them, me and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand. So we see that he did ask for help, and nobody wanted to help. Verse 3, and when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me? Right? So Jephthah's saying the same thing, or a similar thing to what he said to the king of the Ammonites. This God that already took out all these people, you sure that's who you are trying to take on? And now he's saying the same thing to the guys from Ephraim. He says, Yahweh gave me this battle. Why then have you come up to fight against me? In other words, do you want some too? Right? Verse 4, then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. So this is more than words. These guys are getting at it now. Big battle. And the men of Gilead struck down Ephraim, because they said, you are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh. You see, so the people from Ephraim, who were very mixed in with the Canaanite culture, they had all their idols and temples going. They're in full apostasy, and they're mad that the other Israelites from Gilead went to battle without them, or at least that's their excuse of why they're mad. When the Gileadites are the only honorable people in this story. And now the guys from Ephraim want to attack them. And we see that Jephthah's not up for, he doesn't feel like having a conversation about it. If you want to attack, fine. You're next on the list then. The Lord is with me right now, and I'm doing what he wants. So if you're going to attack me, you've attacked Yahweh, and you won't win that battle. So for the first time in history, the Israelites are in a full-out war with themselves. Different tribes. Now, we've seen these small attacks before, but this one's huge. As we'll find out, I think it's 40. Yeah, we'll find out in the next verse. 42,000 guys die. Verse 5 here. And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. So we remember this has happened before. The Jordan is very strategic for these battles, and the fords is where they cross over. This isn't the fords and the Chevys and the Dodges. This is the fords where they can cross the Jordan to get to the other side. All right. So when people are running away and escaping battle, they have to get across the Jordan. And if you hold the crossing point, which is the fords, you can keep people from getting away. And we've seen the Israelites use that to their benefit a few times in the past, and they're doing it again here. Only it's the Gileadites that have captured the Jordan. And so whenever the Ephraimites are trying to cross back over when they're escaping, they can't. the end of verse 5, it says, the men of Gilead said to him, are you an Ephraimite? And when he said no, they said to him, then say Shibboleth. And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. So the word Shibboleth means the word that they used to see who was from where. The Shibboleth is a flowing river or a stream. Okay, so they would have them pronounce this river, and just like here, a person in Massachusetts and a person from Texas are going to pronounce things differently, very distinct accents, right? And now, how many different accents do we have? Those aren't the only ones. Whenever we're in a different state and we say pop and they say soda, they know right away, hey, you ain't from here, right? And they have the same thing going on there. They're figuring out where they're from based on how they pronounce certain things. So this word they used, shibboleth, that they pronounce sibboleth, as I said, it means a flowing river or a stream. What word would we have that we could also use this same thing, use this same test? Creek, right? Which is what this word means anyways, a creek. But if we're guarding a creek, keep people from escaping, and we say, hey, pronounce creek, and this guy, and we're all pronouncing creek, and this other guy comes up and he says, hey, let me cross the creek. And I say, you cross what now? You cross the creek? He said, yeah, the creek. Okay. That's a different way of pronouncing the same word though, right? And that's how they knew who was from where. It's funny that they actually used a word that we also pronounce different ways. It kind of is a way that it makes sense for us, right? So that's the end of that. And verse 7, Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in his city in Gilead. So one thing we're noticing as the times keep moving forward is the periods of the judges are starting to be real short. He judged for 6 years. That's not real long. And this seems to be a good judge, which is pretty rare in this book. And he only judged for 6 years. But the time of oppression keeps going up. Right? They keep being oppressed for longer times, and the judges keep judging for lower times. This is as the book continues down the downward ride of the roller coaster. Right? So Jephthah's story kind of ends without ceremony. There's nothing fancy there. It's that's it. And then it moves into what we might call minor judges for a couple of those there. So verse 8. After Jephthah came Ibzan of Bethlehem. He judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave them marriage outside his clan, and 30 daughters he brought in from outside for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. Okay, so that's all we get for him. Not a lot of information there, but there is some that we can get. He again had a short judgeship. He was only a judge for 7 years. It does not point out any of his glaring weaknesses like it does a lot of the other judges. So we might assume he could have been a righteous judge. On the other hand, we do see that he had 30 sons and 30 daughters, and you do not have 60 children without having multiple wives. So not that necessarily in this time and culture would have been a bad thing, but it certainly wasn't designed to go that way. We also notice that he intentionally gave his 30 daughters outside the clan for marriage, which he was not supposed to do. They were supposed to marry inside their own clan. We also see that his 30 sons, he brought in 30 women from outside his clan to marry them. So he intentionally mixed the bloodline of all 60 of his children. So we have that to think maybe he was not a righteous judge. But truly, we don't have much information. We can compare him to a guy that we talked about a little bit last week, Jair. He also seems very wealthy. The 60 children, you would have to be. The multiple wives like that, in that situation, he would have had to be at least generally wealthy, if not very wealthy. But his choices in marriage for his offspring is curious for sure. We then go to verses 11 and 12, and it says, after him, Elon, the Zebulonite, judged Israel, and he judged for 10 years. Okay, another short one, but a little longer. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. And we know even less about him. We don't even have the other small things to go off for that one. We might come to the same conclusion that he could have also been a righteous judge, since it doesn't point out any of his downfalls, but it also doesn't point out anything else. And that's why they're considered minor judges, even though at their time they would not have been. Verses 13 to 15 say, after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. And he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried at Parathon in the land of Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. So again, we don't know a ton about him. We do know he had 40 sons, which is a crazy amount. So he would have also had multiple wives and 30 grandsons, and that they all rode on 70 donkeys. So for sure, this one was very wealthy. 70 donkeys. I would venture to say most people wouldn't have owned a donkey. And this family owned 70. So it could be that they did that they judged on a traveling circuit, like Samuel ends up doing. We remember looking at the map and seeing that Samuel actually traveled city to city judging. And it could be, since there's 70 of these guys all on donkeys, that they would have done the same thing. We don't know for sure. It seems like that's at least an option. So again, he only judged for 8 years. So it's another short one. It's short for all these guys. I don't know if we remember at the beginning, Jephthah, he only judged for 6 years, right? So we have a 6, 7, 8, 10. Like there's not a long time on these. So we see that the Israelite people are spiraling again. Everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes, which is not a good way to go. We are a runaway train coming off the tracks, thus the picture. The roller coaster, it just keeps going down. And remember, and we'll probably keep bringing it up every week, is the roller coaster, though it keeps going up and down and up and down and up and down, it never goes back up to the same height, and it always goes lower than the previous low. So it's not an even up and down. It is a gradual loss, right? And they're quickly moving that direction. And as we keep going forward, probably the most famous judge, we will start looking at him next week. That's going to be Samson. Yeah. He almost gets hero status. But as we study him, we'll find out he is one of the absolute worst judges in this book. Famous for being, Hulk super strength. But his failures are so many, we're probably not even going to study all of them. They just keep getting worse. What we need to do is keep in mind that our heroes aren't heroes because of physical strength. There's really no reason to make a hero out of Samson because of his physical strength. He got that from God, not his hair, from God. So we have that same strength available to us. Not that we're going to be tipping over buildings or anything like that. We have that strength inwardly, a much stronger strength than Samson had. So we'll start studying that next week. We'll find out that he's one of the most cautionary tales and tragic figures in the whole Bible. But that's where we're going to close this week.